Donald Trump's DOJ facing pressure in person for hiding even more Epstein documents. By in person, I mean what we're watching play out right now. Top House Democrats and lawmakers are meeting with embattled Attorney General Pam Bondi and Deputy AG Blanche over the hiding of files and alleged abuse of redactions. The meeting is confidential. It's happening at this hour. If we get any news, we'll bring it to you. Congressman Garcia says the meeting itself will not substitute for a further grilling under oath.
There's been some reporting that somehow they're not interested in doing the full subpoena conversation and the deposition under oath. This is not a substitute for that. And so that is the very first thing that I'm going to remind the Attorney General of.
That's new from Garcia as they talk about that meeting. Bondi has faced MAGA blowback already and even calls for impeachment. She's had several Epstein debacles.
Hi, buddies. Adam is here. Okay, so what just happened? The biggest threat to Trump isn't one explosive moment. It's the slow, unstoppable collapse of the walls he built to hide damaging information. Courts, Congress, and his own signed laws are forcing secret records into the open one by one, each disclosure worse than the last, building an avalanche of accountability that has already crossed party lines and is now driving formal removal proceedings.
A newly unredacted document from the Epstein files appears to contradict President Trump's claim that he threw the convicted sex offender out of Mar-a-Lago back in 2004. Congressman Dan Goldman this week disclosing a 2009 email where attorneys for Trump and Epstein indicated Epstein was never asked to leave Trump's Florida club for poaching his employees. Goldman accused the Justice Department of deliberately withholding the document.
This document here was redacted to the public. It was unredacted to Congress, and it completely disputes everything that Donald Trump has said about Jeffrey Epstein, about what he knew about the allegations, about his disgusting behavior. If the Attorney General is covering up this information that she then reveals to Congress, what else is she covering up about Donald Trump's involvement?
To understand why this is happening, you have to grasp the unique political dynamics of the hidden documents pattern. It is not like a single leak or a single report that can be dismissed as an isolated incident. This is a recurring structural phenomenon. Time and again, we have seen the same cycle play out. Initial resistance to disclosure, followed by legal or legislative force that pries the documents loose, followed by the revealed contents being far worse than the justifications given for hiding them, followed by renewed efforts to block further disclosure, followed by more forced releases that compound the damage.
Domestically now, we've seen lawmakers late today vote to subpoena the Attorney General for the way her department has handled the Jeffrey Epstein investigation. You saw a handful of Republicans, right, so people in the president's own party, joining Democrats on the House Oversight Committee to vote to bring Pam Bondi in, including Nancy Mace, the congresswoman on the Republican side. Watch this.
I have a lot more questions, and I don't expect to be talking about the stock market, so she better not bring those notes when she comes to the Oversight Committee.
This is the pattern we saw with the Ukraine call memo, which only came out after a whistleblower complaint made continued withholding politically untenable. It is the pattern we saw with the Mar-a-Lago classified documents, which required a grand jury subpoena and still only came to light through surveillance footage that documented the obstruction itself. And it is the pattern we are seeing right now with the Epstein files, which Congress had to pass a specific law to force out of the executive branch's grip. Each new wave of disclosures does not replace the last, it reinforces it. Each wave proves that the resistance was not about protecting legitimate secrets, but about shielding the principle from political damage. And with each wave, the accountability case grows stronger, not weaker. The pattern itself becomes the indictment. Let's dig into the three dimensions of this implosion. First, the Epstein file forced disclosure, which has already produced millions of pages and thousands of Trump mentions, and which is now the subject of a contempt finding and a looming judicial order for even more material. Second, the Mar-a-Lago classified documents case, which assembled the most detailed evidentiary record of concealment ever compiled, including surveillance footage, witness notes, and a special counsel's assessment that the evidence would have sustained a conviction. And third, the removal pressure that this accumulated record is generating, reflected in the growing impeachment vote totals and the bipartisan contempt proceedings that are building the institutional foundation for what could be a historic accountability moment. So let's start with the Epstein files. This is the most comprehensive public record of the hidden documents implosion we have today. Congress passed the Epstein Files Transparency Act, a law that Trump signed, to force the Department of Justice to release records related to the notorious sex traffickers network. But the administration did not comply willingly. They fought over deadlines, over redactions, over how much to produce at every stage. The result was a slow, grudging drip of documents. The first major production included millions of pages, and buried within them, journalists and researchers found something staggering. Trump's name appears more than 1,000 times across the released materials. That is not a typo. 1,000 separate mentions. That volume of references alone created a political earthquake. But the story did not stop there. As the documents were reviewed, gaps appeared. Key FBI interview summaries were missing. Explanations from the administration shifted from coding errors to misplaced files to outright denial. The House Oversight Committee conducted an investigation and issued a contempt report that reached a devastating conclusion. The non-compliance was deliberate. It was not an accident. It was a systematic effort to withhold information that a transparency law, signed by the president, required to be released. That contempt finding is the key. It transforms the disclosure fight from a bureaucratic dispute into a documented pattern of obstruction. And the production is not over. The contempt report is the foundation for a judicial order that could force the release of even more documents, the ones that the deliberate non-compliance has been keeping hidden. Each new wave of Epstein files that comes out will be viewed through the lens of this contempt finding, meaning the public and the lawmakers will assume that whatever is being withheld is likely even more damaging than what has already been seen. The wave after wave pattern ensures that the political damage does not dissipate. It compounds. The first wave revealed 1,000 mentions. The second wave, uncovered through investigative journalism, revealed the missing summaries. The third wave, now being forced by the contempt process, will likely reveal even more. Each wave confirms the pattern of the previous ones, establishing systematic concealment as the consistent approach, not an isolated incident. That accumulation is the political liability. It cannot be managed by calling it a one-off mistake. It is a documented strategy. Now let's shift to the Mar-a-Lago classified documents case. If the Epstein files represent a broad pattern of resistance, the Mar-a-Lago case represents the most specific, most evidentially documented instance of the hiding pattern in the entire accountability record. This is not about administrative foot-dragging. This is about surveillance footage, witness notes, and a cooperating insider who flipped. The evidence assembled by Special Counsel Jack Smith is breathtaking in its detail. We have the surveillance footage from Mar-a-Lago, showing boxes being moved in and out of a storage room after a federal subpoena had been issued demanding those documents be returned. That footage is objective, visual, undeniable proof of physical conduct. Then we have the notes from Evan Corcoran, one of Trump's own lawyers, recorded in the so-called Corcoran and Compel notes. Those notes document conversations in which Trump is described as discussing how to avoid complying with the subpoena, making statements about hiding documents, and engaging in a discussion about a false certification. Those notes are inside professional documentation of the conversations that directed the physical conduct captured on the footage. And then there is the cooperating witness account. A Mar-a-Lago employee, Yushil Taveras, flipped after being presented with the evidence, providing an account that efforts were made to delete the surveillance footage itself. The convergence of these three sources is what makes this case so devastating. The objective visual record from the cameras establishes the physical movement of the boxes. The inside professional notes from a lawyer establish the conversations directing that movement. And the cooperating witness account establishes the subsequent effort to destroy the evidence of the movement. Together, they form a complete narrative that is almost impossible to attack. You cannot dismiss the footage as innocent movement when the notes show it was directed. You cannot dismiss the notes as unreliable when the footage corroborates the timeline. And you cannot dismiss the effort to delete the footage as irrelevant when it shows consciousness of guilt. This is the evidentiary structure that led Jack Smith to make his most authoritative statement, that the evidence was sufficient to sustain a conviction. The beyond a reasonable doubt standard is the highest in our legal system. It requires a unanimous jury to find guilt proven to that level. Smith's professional assessment that this specific evidentiary record met that standard is the most powerful endorsement of the strength of the hiding documents case that exists. It is not speculation, it is the judgment of a career prosecutor who assembled the evidence and concluded it was enough to convict. Now let's connect these two massive document accountability stories to the third dimension, the removal pressure they are generating, because the legal and political worlds do not exist in separate silos. The Epstein file revelations and the Mar-a-Lago evidence are not just courtroom curiosities. They are the fuel for formal institutional action. We have seen this in the House of Representatives, where the number of members voting to advance articles of impeachment has been growing. In one vote, 140 members, a significant increase from a previous vote just months earlier, supported moving forward with impeachment proceedings. Those articles include specific charges related to document concealment, defiance of court orders, and abuse of the Department of Justice. The accountability record built from the Epstein files and the Mar-a-Lago case is explicitly cited as part of the foundation for these charges. And critically, the push for accountability is not solely a partisan Democratic effort. We have seen bipartisan contempt proceedings, with members like Thomas Massie and others crossing party lines to support holding administration officials in contempt. The inherent contempt calls, the subpoena enforcement efforts, the cross-party coalition building, all of it points to a documented response by members of both parties to the specific pattern of systematic document concealment. The cross-party character is essential because it establishes that the accountability demand is not just Democratic opposition. It is a response to a pattern of conduct that has become visible and politically significant across partisan lines. The 140 impeachment votes are the pre-positioned institutional foundation that a future House majority would inherit. It is not a political formation that would need to be built from scratch after an election. It is a documented accountability record that already includes specific charges, specific evidentiary foundations, and specific institutional commitments from a significant number of members. That is the momentum the instant removal framing is pointing toward. It is not instant in the sense of happening tomorrow, but the institutional momentum toward removal proceedings that a Democratic majority would activate is documented, it is building, and it is specifically grounded in the accumulated hidden document accountability record that each new forced disclosure wave adds to. So what do we need to watch as this continues? There are specific, identifiable next waves of disclosure on the horizon. First, the judicial order enforcement of the Bondi-Epstein subpoena. If the House votes to authorize and the court issues the order, it will produce the next mandatory disclosure wave from the Epstein file category. The contempt report's deliberate non-compliance finding establishes that the additional documents being withheld are likely to be more damaging than what has already been produced. That wave is coming. Second, the Smith grand jury materials. Through unsealing litigation, similar to what was done in the Bozell case, the materials from the Mar-a-Lago investigation could become public. This would bring additional inside proceeding materials into the public record, potentially revealing more about the investigation and the evidence that was assembled. Third, the Georgia grand jury materials, including Mark Meadows' immunity testimony and the full range of insider accounts from the pressure campaign, represent a potential next wave from the election interference category. And fourth, new investigative reporting, using the already produced documents as a foundation to identify additional gaps and additional categories of withheld material, will continue the wave-after-wave pattern regardless of the formal judicial and congressional proceeding timelines. The pattern is self-perpetuating. Each disclosure reveals gaps that suggest more disclosures are needed. Each new wave confirms the pattern of the previous waves, and the political liability compounds with each cycle. Let's bring this all the way home with 4 concrete points that give you the full picture. The wave after wave pattern of hidden documents being forced into public view is the most politically consequential recurring theme in the entire Trump accountability story. Each new wave confirms the pattern of the previous ones, establishing systematic concealment as the consistent approach rather than an isolated incident. The accumulation compounds the political damage in ways a single disclosure never could. You can manage one dramatic leak. You cannot manage a documented, recurring pattern of resistance, forced disclosure, content worse than claimed, and renewed resistance, playing out across multiple document categories over years. The Mar-a-Lago surveillance footage and the Corcoran notes are the most specifically documented evidence of the hiding pattern in the entire accountability record. They provide objective visual documentation of physical concealment conduct combined with inside professional documentation of the conversations directing that conduct. This convergence created the evidentiary foundation that Jack Smith assessed as sufficient to sustain a conviction beyond a reasonable doubt. When objective footage of boxes moving after a subpoena is combined with a lawyer's notes of conversations about hiding documents and combined with a witness account of efforts to delete the footage, you have a complete narrative that is extraordinarily difficult to refute. The 140 impeachment votes and the bipartisan contempt proceedings are the documented institutional responses to the accumulated hiding documents pattern. They establish the specific political momentum that the instant removal framing is describing. This is not a hypothetical future possibility. It is a pre-positioned institutional foundation, built in part on the Epstein files and Mar-a-Lago evidence, that a future House majority would inherit. The votes have been cast. The contempt findings have been issued. The accountability record is documented. The institutional machinery is primed. We need to watch the specific pending disclosures, the judicial order on the Epstein subpoena, the unsealing of Smith grand jury materials, the release of Georgia grand jury testimony, and the investigative journalism that will inevitably follow each of these releases will determine whether the accumulated record becomes more damaging with each subsequent wave or plateaus. Based on the pattern so far, and based on the deliberate non-compliance finding, the most likely outcome is that each wave will add to the damage, not diminish it. The bottom line is this. The Department of Justice has released millions of pages of Epstein files under congressional mandate. Trump's name appears more than 1,000 times in what has been released so far, and the House Oversight Committee found that the non-compliance with the transparency law was deliberate. The Mar-a-Lago case assembled surveillance footage, lawyer notes, and a cooperating witness account that a special counsel assessed as sufficient to sustain a conviction beyond a reasonable doubt. And in response, 140 House members have voted to advance impeachment articles, building a bipartisan, pre-positioned institutional foundation for accountability. The instant removal has not happened yet. But the documents are imploding wave after wave, and the institutional responses are building the accountability foundation that each new wave adds to. The pattern of resistance, forced disclosure, and compounding damage is accelerating, not slowing down. And the meltdown we are seeing from the administration is the direct, documented result of watching that pattern unfold in real time. Stay tuned, because the judicial order pathway is being activated, the unsealing litigation is continuing, and we are going to be right here covering every single development as it unfolds. If you are not subscribed yet, hit that button right now. Drop a comment below and tell me what you think. Which hidden document category produces the most damaging next wave? The Epstein files, the Mar-a-Lago materials, or something we haven't even seen yet? I want to hear from you. I'll see you in the next one.